Each year, the Society for Calligraphy in Southern California holds a conference in Pomona, California. This conference, somewhere between 100 and 120 people, has been happening for 17 years. The Society for Calligraphy celebrates in 2024 its 50th anniversary, and Marsha and Larry Brady were founding members of that group in 1974. I was privileged to be able to talk about Marsha and Larry, the contributions that they gave to our calligraphic community around the world, and to celebrate the contributions that they gave to our society in general. I hope you'll join me for the next short period of time to find a little bit more about these two wonderful people. There's a little bit of a gallery at the end with their artwork, and I hope you enjoy the presentation.
So this is Marsha and Larry. This is sometime in the late 1990s. And they're receiving a Lifetime Achievement Award from in this particular case, the Orange County Society for Calligraphy. And these are the people that gave it to them. I was just asking Sylvia Kowal, hey, was this a Lifetime Achievement Award? And she's like, I don't know. I wasn't there. Hey, Sylvia, I have pictures. This is Larry's poster for Art of the Scribe. And so there's certain of us here who know Marsha and Larry in certain different ways. This is Marsha's work. We've all come to know Marsha and her work. Those of us who took classes from her. This is Larry's work. All of these were from the Harrison collection in San Francisco, where some of their work resides. And many of us remember Larry as the dean of the art department at Cerritos College, the longtime dean of the art department. I would say probably most of us here remember Marsha kind of like this. In class, bending over a table, explaining letters. And I would say that most of us here know and love her that way. This is one of Marsha's handouts. That's the handout from my file that I've kept for how many years has it been, CC? 25 or 30 maybe? And this is that same handout that was cleaned up for the 100th anniversary edition of the Speedball textbook when we asked Marsha to contribute her alphabet to that textbook. Marsha and Larry really were analysts when it comes to lettering. This is Larry's analysis of both Roman and italic and some of his handouts based on italic letter forms and how you do the italic letter forms. These are handouts that he gave to his students at that class that he developed at Cerritos College in the late 60s and early 70s. Flemish illuminated manuscripts. I have this out there because the original piece of this is on a table behind me that contains all of their work. It's right in the middle. And this illustrates sort of Larry's method. He would work with the letter forms, and then he would say, okay, how am I going to work this out? And what are the capitals going to look like? And start writing. And then he'd write more and more and more. And then he turned it into, for the International Lettering Arts Society, a beautiful poster. That poster also is back there. And that is a screened poster in gold and color. And there's all that lettering with the gold and the color. So depending on what angle you look at it, it will appear or disappear on that background, which really is indicative of kind of how angels would appear, isn't it? Some of us have been privileged to take them as team teachers. They were a really dynamic force teaching together. And some of us who might be viewing this know them as grandparents. One of us here knows them as mom and dad. But what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about who these people were, what they did, how they influenced us, and why they possibly allowed this picture to be taken somewhere in the 1970s. But they influenced us all, and so I just wanted to talk a little bit about their influence. This is Rose and Ned Lenari sometime in the late 1920s. Rose and Ned Lenari were Marsha's parents, and Marsha grew up in a town called Salida, Colorado. She climbed fences. She graduated from 6th grade. And they lived in this house, which still stands today. I took a picture of it when I was out there. And this is them in the back of that house, that same house, somewhere in mid to late 1930. Marsha always wanted to be a teacher, just like her mom. Her dad was a shoemaker. Her mom was a teacher. And to that end, she went to Greeley College in Colorado, which at the time was probably one of the premier schools that would teach teachers how to teach. She eventually got a job in Long Beach, California, teaching in elementary school. Later, she taught at Jefferson Junior High, for those of you who know Long Beach. And Long Beach at this time was a little bit different. In the early 1900s, Long Beach actually was the most expensive place in the nation to live. One of the things that I didn't know, but I found out doing this research, was the silent movie studios were here. This is Balboa Films. Balboa Films had contracts with many stars, and they asked the stars to live in Long Beach if they were going to make movies with them. So there was Fatty Arbuckle, and there was Harold Lloyd, and there was Theda Bara, and there was Charlie Chaplin. And all of these stars would come together at Balboa Films in Long Beach. And because they were required to live here, as you might expect, they gravitated towards some of the prettiest land in Long Beach. This is Ocean Avenue in Long Beach, California. And so some of these stars built mansions in this area. This is one of those mansions that still stands today. And this one's another one. This was named Wuthering Heights, not Wuthering Heights, Wuthering Heights, tongue in cheek, still stands today. But at the time in the 1930s, W.C. Fields lived there for quite a long time. Clark Gable and Carole Lombard vacationed there. And in 1964, that same house was turned into a bunch of rental units. And a lady named Marsha Lanari rented one of the bottom floors in that mansion. Now, there was some guy who rented the top floor. Larry Brady grew up in Montana. He went to Montana State University. He started studying chemical engineering and changed majors and graduated with a degree in art. He had a number of odd jobs, including being a Gandy dancer. Gandy dancer is spelled with a G, and in case you don't know what that is, here's what that is. The guys who work on the railroads. That name Gandy comes from apparently one of the tools that they used, and he was pretty proud of working in that. He later was a chaplain in the Army, and he relocated to Long Beach and moved into that same house where that little Marsha Lanari lived on the bottom floor. And somehow, one or the other caught their eye. I think Marsha probably caught his eye. And eventually they started to date. And Larry decided that he was going to make Marsha dinner. Now, you have to understand in 1964, and Larry being a bachelor and of German and Irish descent, he decided to make spaghetti for an Italian girl. What could go wrong? And so he boiled the noodles and he put them in the colander. But at a certain point, the colander tipped over and the spaghetti began to run down the garbage disposal. And Larry panicked. And he reached his hand in, grabbed the spaghetti, put it back in the colander, hoping maybe she hadn't noticed. But she had. And despite that fact, they were engaged. And over the next 59 years, Larry Brady never had to cook another meal again. Larry got a job at General Telephone. When he interviewed with the guy who was going to hire him, the guy ended up saying, you don't know anything about graphic design, but you sure know how to draw. And so he spent some time there. And then he came under the tutelage of a guy named Mortimer Leach. Mort Leach was an advertising scion in the Los Angeles area. He taught at the Art Center College of Design. And this is where Larry really learned how to draw letters and create letter forms. He then took a class at UCLA in the late 60s from a guy named Maury Nimoy. Maury Nimoy was one of the founding members of this group, so that should be well known to most of you. Maury Nimoy, he did a lot of work for the film industry. This is an article or some excerpts from an article that Jill Bell wrote in 2002 about Maury Nimoy and his role in the film industry, and this is some of the work that he did, including that up in the upper right, where it was at that time sort of rare for somebody to get credit as a title artist, and he got credit as a title artist. He was nominated for an Emmy. He has a pretty good filmography, and then he's got his own font called Jongleur that's up there. But Maury Nimoy really had a big influence on Larry. Larry considered him his mentor. And so there's these concentric circles, these little pebbles in the pond, the influences that spread from mentor and teacher to student. And Larry soaked up all of that information and began to not only letter at a really high level, but to teach. And by the way, he was a left-handed calligrapher. And so when you're looking at how he's sort of just in this weird position, but he would go really slow and very precise in all of his letter forms. He eventually went to Cal State Long Beach and got his master's degree, and then started Brady Design. Brady Design, he started with a partner. He began to get jobs. And one of the jobs that he got was with an art director named Saul Bass. Saul Bass was a pretty famous art director at this time. You would remember a lot of his iconic work, including West Side Story and all of the Alfred Hitchcock movies. And Saul Bass had him work on the Getty Center logos. But one of the first assignments that he gave before he assigned Larry to work on the Getty Center logos was to do 100 versions of the letter A. And Larry talked about that throughout his career. Pebbles in the pond, influences that spread. This is an ampersand from that. That's the original ampersand. It's signed to me down there in 2013 from Larry. It's something I treasure and I'll never get rid of. A hand-inked, beautiful ampersand. It's about this big, and it's one of the cards that he did for the Getty Center. Larry and Marsha, along with Maury Nimoy and Kitty Marriott and some others, were instrumental in founding the Society for Calligraphy in 1974. This is Larry's poster for their first exhibition in 1975. And these are some of the works that he did, some of the logos that he did for some of his commercial work. The Lavache logo on the top is really a famous one. Most of the calligraphers know, obviously, the Getty Trust. But that one on the bottom that says California was for that same Lavache company. And the original work, that original word California, is on that table behind me. You can go see that, how big it was and how amazing it is on what he did. International Letter Arts Network decided to contract with him, and he came up with their logo, including all of these many other logos. And the La Mirada Theater for the Performing Arts also asked him to do their logos. Now, the legend, according to the director over there, is that Larry came with a portfolio, and as soon as the lady that he was talking to saw that first logo there on the upper left, she went, "That's it. I don't even want to see anything else." And he's like, "Wait, I have all this other..." "No, I don't want to see anything else." And he went home. He was kind of mad. He got the job, but he was kind of mad about it. Well, these are all the other logos that he did. And he did these in various colors for various aspects of the Performing Arts Center. And those directors are really interested in seeing these logos again. This is the Lavache that I was talking about earlier. It's very famous among the calligraphers. There's two different versions. When Angie and I did the book, we put this one in because we had seen the other one so much. I got to see these in person. And for those of you who have visited the tables downstairs, there's a set. Looks like somebody already took one set, but there's these two sets of Dr. Martin's concentrated watercolors. That's what Larry did both of those logos with. So there's one set left if anybody wants a piece of history. You can't have the artwork, but you can have these half-used watercolors if you want. These are some of the other logos that Larry did, including the Brady Design logo on the left there, which includes all of the letters in Brady in that one design. Jewish Aid Services, Southwestern College. And then Cerritos College called, and he became a teacher at Cerritos College. He was an adjunct professor there during the time that he was at Brady Design. And he developed the calligraphy program that most of us know today that Marsha carried on. He also got tapped to do the posters for the performing arts. And sometimes he subcontracted those out to one of his students in particular, who you'll hear about later. He also was pretty outstanding at what he did and got noticed. But then he was contacted by Long Beach State. Long Beach State at the time was one of the premier colleges in the nation for graphic design. Larry taught a class there that always had waiting lists. That's the campus of Long Beach State, including, I love the fountains because they have all the drips going into the water, making concentric circles, overlapping and influencing each other. This is some of the stuff that Larry did while he was at Long Beach State in that graphic design class. Many of us might notice and understand the page canons of page construction, but he also did grid systems, and he also did Gestalt laws for design. At that time, he started doing these designs. This is his version of a color wheel. This is his version of an alphabet. All of the letters of the alphabet contained within those circles. And this is my favorite piece. This is a famous saying. He calls this the Sador circles. And what he did was he created alphabets out of a quarter turn of a circle. And so how this reads, for those of you who don't know, is Sador, Arepo, Tenet, Opera, Rotas. But the thing about it is that it reads the same any way you read it. I know that these were important to him because this is his drawing table, and there's those three pieces right over his drawing table where he could look at them anytime he was at his drawing table. There was a certain point where Marsha watched Larry starting to do this lettering. She got real interested in it, and she began to do lettering herself. And she said, I think I would like to teach this. And Larry said, well, if you're going to teach it, you got to take a class from Maury Nimoy. And so she did. In the late 1960s, 1968, if I remember correctly, she took classes at UCLA from Maury Nimoy. Again, those same concentric circles, those overlapping influences from Maury and Mort Leach and Saul Bass to Larry to Marsha to all of us. Marsha began to teach. I remember her at the board doing letter forms on the chalkboard, sitting down with us, doing all of these letters. And obviously, she was a great teacher. There was an opportunity in 1979 to go to the Rochester Institute of Technology back east because Hermann Zoff, a world-famous calligrapher, was teaching a class there. Marsha and Larry went back to that class, along with many people that we all would consider, we know their names and would consider them royalty in calligraphy. This is a picture of that class at that same time with a young Julian Waters at 22 years of age there on the right with some groovy sideburns from 1979. And if you don't know who Hermann Zoff is, then you might want to take some time and look him up. He's one of the most famous calligraphers that's ever been. He's got a font named Zoffino. You've probably used it if you've done any kind of a script in any digital fashion. He taught extensively here and abroad, and a movie was made about him in his life that's still out there on YouTube, by the way. Marsha and Larry became great friends with he and his wife Gundrun, and traveled to Germany quite a bit, as well as the Waters were also very good friends with them. And I love this picture. Marsha, is she photobombing? Is she taking a selfie? I don't know, but she's like the cat that got the cream right there. In 1981, the first international conference came in Minnesota. Donald Jackson came over to teach. And that conference was mainly Donald Jackson teaching to an auditorium. Later conferences, they tapped Marsha and Larry, and this is the 1986 conference called Innovations, and Larry taught, and Julian Waters taught, and Sheila Waters taught, and Thomas Ingmeyer taught, and Marsha Brady taught. And in fact, Marsha Brady was one of the evening lectures along with Alice and along with Jean Larcher and along with this guy named Donald Jackson. For those of you who don't know Donald Jackson, calligrapher to the Queen of England. Larry had to keep people in line. Apparently, he did that with an iron fist. But I think he was a pretty fun teacher. His mind went in design directions that were extremely innovative. They were popular. They were asked to go over to Germany. And so they went to Germany and they taught classes in Germany. And here they are team teaching in Germany. And we all know Marsha talked with her hands. She couldn't really talk without her hands. In fact, it was something that Larry always said. He said, one time I was talking to somebody and they were talking about Marsha talking with her hands. And I said, no, she can't talk with her hands. Yes, she can. And he said, no, I'll prove it. And so during a class, he grabbed her hands and she couldn't talk. And she looked at him, and he let go of her hands, and she just resumed right in the middle of the sentence that she was on, like nothing ever happened. But I'm sure probably Larry heard about that a little bit later in the evening. Again, them going over to Germany, concentric circles, pebbles in the pond, influences from their teachers and their mentors, and they're passing it on to future teachers and mentors. This is a man named Ron Taft. Ron Taft was Larry's student in 1968. He's one of the most prominent designers in the world today. He works with Graphis Magazine, which is the most prominent graphic design magazine in the world today. He's won over 30 awards with that magazine, including 5 platinum awards, and he's won a couple of Emmys as well. He's an art director that all of the designers want to work with. There's designers from all over the world who look at his work and then look at how he deals with them in design, and they line up to work with him. This is a piece that he did with a number of famous designers. Each designer or each team took a different letter, and Ron Taft teamed up with Larry to do that letter M. And he told me on the phone, that's always kind of represented Marsha to me. Chris has that piece hanging in his studio as we speak. The pictures that I'm showing you were on an annual that was dedicated to some of the most famous people. Ron Taft was being one of them, and he asked 4 people to do testimonials for him, and Larry Brady was one of them. Larry Brady did that testimonial down there on the bottom of this page. Overlapping influences, Ron Taft reaching more people than Larry could ever reach with the influences and the mentoring that Larry gave him. This is when I came into the picture. This is what I remember of Marsha Brady. We'd go into class as we'd do our calligraphy, we'd have our critiques. This was a group that some of us are still here today and some of us aren't, but there was some unruly people, old Dan Jett, one of my favorite, and then a man who he called me when he heard that Marsha and Larry had passed, and he said, "Yeah, this is your mentor." And he used to sit next to me after Cece was done with me in class. And I said, you mean you're my tormentor, I think. So I ended up becoming a model for some drawings that we did. But we worked in class, and I was comparing notes with somebody who had driven an hour to get to Marsha's class. I lived in Temecula at the time, which was about an hour and a half away. So I was like, I win. I won the contest. Marsha at one point made some offhand comment about, hey, listen, just because you put a purple mat on it doesn't make it pretty. And so we all conspired to put purple mats on everything that day. And we got in there before she got in, and we hung them up, and people did poems to Marsha, and thanks to Annie Lawrence for this picture. This is a Calligraph of 2003, and this page is by a man who's pretty internationally recognized, and many of you will know, named Mike Gold. And Mike Gold, in one of his first classes, took a class from Marsha. He took the italic class from Marsha. And when I wrote to him, I said, tell me a little bit about that. And what he wrote back to me was, Marsha, I watched how she taught, and much of what I do today is because of her. He also, Mike is a really creative, out-of-the-box individual. He never took a class from Larry, but he heard about those 100 A's that Larry did. And so he incorporated that into some of his classes. And so here's some pictures of 100 A's that either Mike or some of his class had done. And once you do 100 of anything, you get to know it pretty well. Concentric circles, pebbles in the pond, influences from their teachers and their mentors, and they're passing it on to future teachers and mentors. Angie Van Gallis and I were asked to do the Speedball textbook. We were honored to do it, and we picked Marsha and Larry to be our consultants. And when you go to Marsha and Larry's house, there's a lot of artwork on the walls. This is some of the artwork that was on the walls. This is Marsha's artwork. That was in some of the bedrooms. This one I actually found, and I needed to take a picture of it because it was this cute little thing. It was just about this big, really, really small piece. But these pieces are what the environment was that we were able to spend in her house and with her artwork. We sat with Marsha and Larry, and we talked about what was going to go into the Speedball textbook. Angie, there in the back, The lady in the front is a lady named Kelly Braun. She's from Speedball. It was her, I think, first or second year at Speedball, and her first project was to do the Speedball textbook. She knew a little bit about lettering, but she didn't know tons about lettering, of course, like we do. And so Marsha and Larry brought out pages and pages and started to explain lettering to her, and she was fascinated by the explanations. The page she's looking at right now is this page, one of the most important pages that I put in many of my handouts. And it's one of the most important pages in letter forms. And so she, at the end of being presented with this from both Marsha and Larry, said, I really never understood lettering, but you just made it so easy for me to understand some of these elements of the lettering. Now, I never took a class directly from Larry, but this is how I remember Larry. This is Larry in his upstairs library with his work. And whenever I had a question, especially after they were retired and went to Colorado, I would call and Marsha would say, "Hi, Randy," and she'd hand the phone to Larry. And I soon found out that my job was just to tell Larry jokes and make him laugh. But many times I actually asked him questions. And so he became one of my mentors. And this is how we remember Marsha, standing over the table, hair flying as she did letters, earrings swaying, necklaces going back and forth, bracelets clacking, dipping her pen into that Pelican 4001 blue-black ink that was her favorite. And this is how most of us remember her, fondly. She was a really great teacher. She's one of those people that when she explained something to you, she'd watch. And when you got it, she'd get this little triumph in her eye and she'd get this little smile. And then she'd just move on to the next person. And that's what I remember best about her. I would love to, I know many of you, these people were extremely important to you. So I'd like to do something in two stages. The first thing I'd like to do is, if you took a class from either Marsha or Larry and your teacher, could you please stand? All of those influences, those teachers and mentors. Stay standing, please. If you took a class from Marsha or Larry and were influenced by them, your calligraphy was influenced, will you please stand? Well, they've been retired for 20 years. Thank you so much. This is Marsha's. This is one of the final pieces that I got from Marsha at the end of your 2-year class that you had, what she called a certificate program. She would make something for each individual and send it to you. And this is an A that's been embossed, and it says everything begins with A. I think that's really, really a great theme for tonight. These influences that we've taken. Thank you so much for listening about these people that we loved, and I hope you guys have a great night. Thank you so much.